This is my basement. I've tried to make it a fun place to hang out by giving my son something to do with his friends, like bumper pool, and this ping pong table that I made in a previous video. And I even made this nifty little TV table to hold all of his video game stuff. But what my son really needs is a game involving throwing weapons, where he could injure himself as well as endanger the safety of all of his friends at the same time. So I thought darts would be a great idea. I'll just make a simple 2-door cabinet where, once the doors are opened, you'll find a nice dartboard and scoreboards and little holders for the darts themselves. But I also want to add a little visual interest to the cabinet while the doors are closed too. So I was thinking it would be kind of neat if I could add a decorative design around the border of each door, as well as some custom crown molding at the top and bottom of the cabinet. Overall, it should be a pretty simple build. Let's see if I can do it. The first thing I did was print off all the various board dimensions that I'll need for this. As you may have already guessed, I want to make this entire cabinet out of black walnut. But I was hoping that I could find some pieces that were already wide enough for the doors so that I wouldn't have to glue up any panels. Luckily, I found a couple pieces that were definitely wide enough. Actually, they're a little too wide, and I'll have to trim them down a bit so that they'll fit through my planer. First, I need to trim off all the ugly bits over at the miter saw. Then, at the table saw, I can put 2 clean edges on them so that they're just wide enough to fit through my planer. And now that they're narrow enough, I can plop them down onto a sled and add some shims to keep them from wobbling, and then lock them into place by wedging them against a cleat. This will allow me to plane the top face of each piece and to get them perfectly flat. And once I got the top flat, I can remove the piece from the sled, flip it over, and then flatten the other side. Now, I use this process for both the doors as well as all the other pieces of the cabinet. So this kept me pretty busy at the planer for quite a while. So much so that my little warning light began to flash telling me that the bag was full on my dust collector. Fortunately, it's not that big of a deal to empty it. I just shut it down, I unlatch the bottom canister, and I lift out the little bag. Then it just takes me a couple minutes for me to run it out back, dump it into my neighbor's pool, and then get back into the shop. From there, I just reuse the same bag. I latch it back together, and I'm back in business. Once I got all the pieces down to a thickness of exactly 3/4 of an inch, I can put away the planer and then put a clean edge on everything using the joiner. After that, I can cut all the pieces down to their final widths at the table saw. Then at the miter saw, I can line things up just right, position my stop block, and then cut all the pieces out to their final lengths. I've gotten some questions from some of you asking why it looks like I sometimes bob the miter saw blade up and down before making my cut. When I do this, I'm actually sneaking up to my mark, and seeing where the blade is actually cutting and making small adjustments helps me get a very accurate cut in the end. Plus, I'm usually on a pogo stick at the same time, but you just can't see it since it's out of frame. I tilt my blade to 45 degrees, and then I cut down a piece of 1/2-inch plywood to be the French cleat that I'll use to hang things from. And then I add a round over to the top and the bottom pieces of the cabinet. Everything gets a good sanding now, since it'll be much more difficult to do this once it's all assembled. And then I can actually start to piece some of the cabinet together. The first bit is to add the cross member that joins the 2 sides. I put some glue on the ends of the cross piece and then mushed it all in place. Then, using some longer clamps, I could squeeze everything together until it dried. And once it had, I marked out a couple spots on either side where I could use my drill to do a counterbore. I drilled pilot holes. I drove in some reinforcement screws, glued in a dowel, and then I flush trimmed it off. Once I sanded everything smooth, The plugs really popped out against the sapwood of the side piece, and it really turned out looking
gorgeous.
Now I could spread some glue along the top edge and get the top of the cabinet in place. Once it was, I added some clamps and I left it to dry. And once it had, I did the same thing for the bottom of the cabinet, and I used the cleat as a spacer again to make sure things were being held the correct distance apart. After the frame was all glued together, I marked some holes for some reinforcement screws, counterboard, drilled, drove in the screws, and plugged things up just like I did before. With the frame done, I could lay it face down and use a rabbiting bit in my trim router to carve an inset for the back panel to fit into. And since I want the French cleat to sit flush with the back of the cabinet, I had to go around several times to make the rabbet deep enough to accommodate the thickness of the panel and the cleat together. And once I got it down to the right spot, I could fire up the vacuum and suck up the mountain of walnut dust that I had just made. I used the table saw to cut down a piece of underlayment, which is about 1/8 inch thick. And then I traced one of the rabbet guide bearings on each of the corners. Then over at the belt sander, I could round off those corners so that it would fit down into the rabbet. I put down a bead of glue around the entire cabinet and I dropped the back panel into place. Then, using some pieces of scrap wood, I could add a bunch of clamps that pressed it down firmly into position. Then at this point, the cleat could get glued into place. And now I can start making the decorative crown molding. I start by fastening on my router table fence, and then I run each piece over a Roman ogee bit, leapfrogging my hold downs. I put my miter attachment on my crosscut sled and I cut off some sections to glue on. Once the side molding had dried, I could fasten on the longer pieces and leave them to cure as well. Now this is where things get interesting. Remember at the beginning how I said I wanted to add a decorative border around the doors? Well, I saw this technique in a super old woodworking magazine and I wanted to try it out. But basically the gist of it is that if you make an equilateral triangle and you mount it to the bottom of your router, you can bring the 80s back. And since I know firsthand about how awesome the 80s were, I wanted to bring a bit of it back into my house. Next thing you know, I'll be dusting off my parachute pants and squeezing into my hypercolor t-shirts again. I used some of the scrap underlayment to make my triangle, and then a compass to mark out exactly where the center is. And that's key, because for this to work right, you have to mount this triangle so that the router bit is in the exact center. Because if it's not, your design won't line up. You'll get super frustrated, and then you'll have to steal more lumber from your neighbor to make new doors. Once I got it all made, I could fire up the router and slowly lower the bit so that it poked all the way through. Then I set up two fences. I clamped in one of my doors and I started routing. Here's how it works. It slides down one fence like normal, but once the tip of the triangle bumps into the corner, the router will pivot until the next edge lines up against the other fence. Then I stop. I unclamp the door, I rotate it, tighten it all back down, and then I pick up where I left off. It's a pretty cool little technique, and I certainly dig the look on these doors. I'm not sure I'd outfit all my kitchen cabinets with it, but for the dartboard cabinet, I really think this is going to look great. I love it. Now for hinges, I needed some that would allow the doors to open up really wide. I found a couple sets of frameless hidden hinges that are designed to open up 175 degrees, and that'll be perfect for this. They're European style as well, so I could mount the other piece of them without having to balance the doors in position. Once I got both pieces screwed into place, I could just clip the door into place and make any tiny adjustments to the hinges as necessary so that things line up perfectly. And I thought it'd be kind of neat to have a place to store the darts themselves. So I poked a few holes into another block of wood, and I added a little countersink to each one so that the darts would nest down in there pretty well. I offset the holes a bit towards the front so that there would be room for the fins against the door. And here you can see how each one fits down in there really nicely. I put a chamfer on the edges over at the router table. And then I could glue each one onto the bottom of the doors. For a finish, I decided to try out this product from Bumbleshoots. This particular finish is a tung oil mixture, so it's really easy to apply. Basically, you just wipe it on and you let it seep down into all the nooks and crannies. And then, just like how I eat peanut M&Ms, you just keep adding more until it physically won't accept it any longer because it's full. Then, once all that had some time to soak in and dry, I buffed the entire piece with some Bumbleshoots wax to seal the finish in and to give the surface a little sheen. I burned my logo into the back, and then I could mount the dartboard into the cabinet. I went into my neighbor's wine cellar and I took all the corks out of his bottles because I figured they'd be perfect for this project. See, since I'm about as accurate as Ray Charles at the gun range, I figured I'd be putting lots of holes in the back panel with all my misses. But if I were to glue down these corks and fit them in around the dartboard, not only will it look super cool, but I won't have a bunch of unsightly holes to look at. Now this process took a while, but it was actually pretty fun piecing it all together. Plus, it adds a ton of interest, and it works great too. I picked up a couple dry erase scoreboards and I mounted one on each of the doors. And of course, I used some of my grandfather's old screws to mount them in place. A couple cabinet poles got screwed on, and then I very respectfully and gently requested the assistance of my son and his friend to do some light and easy work in the garage.
All right, get to work, my slaves.
I just figured that when my boy decides to play darts blindfolded, that he'll inevitably be sending them straight into the wall. But if the wall is cladded with a collage of pallet slats, you'd never notice. Plus, it actually will look kind of cool. I just used a hammer and I de-nailed each piece. This took a little bit, but once I was done, I had quite a collection of slats. Each one got ran over the joiner, and then I ripped them all down to width on the table saw. To put them on the wall, I squeezed on some construction adhesive and then just shot them in with some 18-gauge brad nails. The wall actually went up really quick, and before I knew it, I was putting in the piece at the very top. I made some pallet wood trim and I popped that in to hide the edges, and then the wall was done. I mounted the cleat up on the wall at just the right height, and then I could lift the whole cabinet up and drop it into place. Then to secure the cabinet onto it, I added a screw at the bottom that'll keep it from ever being accidentally bumped up and off of the cleat. And then I just hid that behind a cork. And here's the finished product. The doors turned out awesome, and the figure of the black walnut is just gorgeous. I love the scoreboards, and the little dart holders are sure handy. The molding that I put at the top and the bottom has a ton of character in it, and so do all the corks that make up the back panel. There's just so much to look at. And since my vision isn't getting any better as I get older, I added a couple LED spotlights to brighten things up while we play, and they work so good. Well, that's it. It really turned out awesome. If you'd like to try making it for yourself, I have very detailed step-by-step instructions available on my website over at fishersshoponline.com. They walk you through every step in making this project, and they're super affordable at just $5. Thanks to Bumbleshoots for letting me try out their finish. It really worked out nicely. If you'd like to pick some up for yourself, you can use the coupon code FISHER10 and save some money on your order over at bumbleshoots.com. Hey, thanks so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to give it a like and give me a comment down below. And if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. I've got a lot of other videos I'm sure you'll like, as well as a bunch more to come. Well, that's it for this one. Take care, and we'll see you next time.
Oh, gotta turn the saw on.
Why won't this drill?
Is it just super dull? I think it's just super dull. Oh yeah, super dull. Okay, let's get a better bit. Got it. Oh man, that's not good. Dang it. Oh, it needs to be... Oh, they need to be recessed. I did not do that. Crap. My very first piece. Super warped. I didn't even realize that. Gotta get a new one. Nice. I'm still learning how to walk. Double 19. Uh-oh. That was awesome.
It scared me.
Oh no. It's like exploding out the back, isn't it? Yup. Oh no. Oh no, it's everywhere.